What if the silence you're experiencing isn't rejection but preparation? What if the space between you and the divine masculine isn't distance at all, but pressure building beneath the surface? For so long it has felt like nothing. No messages, no explanations, no closure, just silence. A silence so heavy it echoes. A silence that makes you question everything, your intuition, your connection, even your sanity. But what if this silence has a pulse? What if, right now, beneath what appears to be indifference, something is cracking? Because here's the truth no one tells you about the divine masculine's silence. It is rarely peace. It is rarely freedom. And it is almost never forgetfulness. It is containment. And containment cannot last forever. You see, when a divine masculine withdraws, it can look cold, calculated, even cruel. He stops reaching out. He becomes distant, detached. Sometimes he throws himself into work, friends, distractions, even other connections, anything that helps him avoid sitting with the intensity of what he feels. But avoidance is not the same as absence. And silence is not the same as detachment. If he truly felt nothing, there would be no need to run. Let that sink in. People do not run from what is insignificant. They run from what overwhelms them. And the twin flame connection, whether you call it that or simply a soul-deep bond, is overwhelming. It shakes foundations. It exposes wounds. It forces growth. It strips illusions. For someone who has built his identity around control, logic, pride, or emotional self-protection, this kind of connection feels like losing control entirely. So he chooses silence. Not because he doesn't feel, but because he feels too much. Imagine a man standing in front of a mirror that shows him not his reflection, but his soul. Every insecurity, every fear of abandonment, every childhood wound, every suppressed emotion. That is what this connection does to him. You become the mirror. And when he looks at you, he doesn't just see you. He sees himself. The parts he's avoided. The parts he's denied. The parts he buried long ago. And for a while, it feels easier to turn away from the mirror than to face it. So he convinces himself he's fine. He tells himself he needs space. He tells himself it was too intense. He tells himself he just wants peace. But here's the question no one asks. If he found peace, why does your energy still feel connected? If he truly moved on, why do you still feel those sudden waves of emotion that don't even feel like yours? Why do you sense him at random moments? Why do dreams feel more real than reality? Why does the silence feel charged instead of empty? Because silence in this dynamic is not the end. It is the pressure before the breakthrough. Think of water heating in a sealed container. From the outside it looks calm, still, unmoving. But inside molecules are colliding. Pressure is rising. Heat is building. Eventually something has to give. That is where he is. On the outside he may appear composed, distracted, even unaffected. But internally, there are moments he can't explain. Moments when your name crosses his mind out of nowhere. Moments when a song hits differently. Moments when he reaches for his phone and stops himself. Moments when he wonders if you finally let go. And that last one, that one unsettles him the most. Because deep down he senses the shift. He senses when you're no longer chasing. He senses when you choose your own healing. He senses when your energy pulls back. And suddenly the silence doesn't feel powerful anymore. Feels fragile. Here's what most people misunderstand. The divine masculine's silence often feels powerful to him at first. Feels like control. Like reclaiming his independence. Like proving he isn't emotionally dependent. But time changes that illusion. Because silence does something unexpected. It amplifies what was left unsaid. Every unexpressed feeling grows louder in the quiet. Every avoided truth becomes heavier. Every suppressed emotion waits. And eventually, silence stops protecting him. Starts confronting him. Have you ever tried not thinking about something important? The more you try not to think about it, the louder it becomes. That's what happens here. He may distract himself during the day. He may appear confident around others. He may even convince himself he made the right choice. But late at night, when distractions fade, when the world gets quiet, when there is no one to perform for, the truth returns. And the truth sounds like you. The silence will end not because you force it to, Not because you send one more message. Not because you prove your worth. Not because you wait anxiously. It will end because pressure cannot sustain itself forever. Avoidance has an expiration date. And right now, whether you see it or not, something is shifting. The divine masculine can only suppress the pull for so long. He can only ignore the dreams for so long. He can only deny the emotional mirror for so long. He can only pretend the connection was just chemistry for so long. At some point, the cost of running becomes greater than the cost of facing it. And that is when silence breaks. But here's the deeper layer. This isn't just about him. The silence has been working on you too. While he wrestles internally, you have been transforming. You have felt the ache. You have faced the abandonment wound. You have confronted your fear of losing him. You have questioned your worth. You have sat with loneliness. You have cried. You have healed. And somewhere along the way something changed. You stopped begging for clarity. You stopped chasing crumbs. You started choosing yourself. And that shift, it reverberates. Energy does not disappear. It responds. When you detach from desperation and step into self-respect, the dynamic changes. Because now, the silence is no longer something happening to you. It becomes something happening for you. And when you are no longer waiting from a place of lack, he feels it. Not consciously at first, but energetically. He feels the difference between being pursued and being released. And release is terrifying. Because release means he might actually lose you. So let me ask you something. What if the silence you feared is the very thing preparing him to return differently? What if this space isn't punishment, but alignment? What if the universe or life or divine timing or simple emotional growth needed this distance so both of you could evolve beyond ego? The silence is not random. It is restructuring. It is dismantling illusions. It is exposing truths. It is forcing growth on both sides. And when it ends, because it will, it won't end the same way it began. It won't be about ego. It won't be about control. It won't be about pride. It will be about confrontation. Confronting feelings. Confronting vulnerability. Confronting the truth that some connections cannot be outrun. Right now you may not see the cracks forming, but they are there. The silence is thinning. The walls are weakening. And the divine masculine is reaching the point where avoidance no longer feels safe. When that moment arrives, it won't feel dramatic. It may start subtly. A thought. A memory. An urge to check on you. A dream too vivid to ignore. A realization that no one else feels the same. And suddenly the silence that once felt powerful feels unbearable. And that is when everything changes. Because silence can delay destiny, but it cannot cancel it. And the truth? He can't avoid you anymore. Not because you chase. Not because you force. But because what you represent is no longer something he can silence within himself. From the outside it looks simple. He pulled away. He stopped responding the same way. He became distant. Slower. Colder. Maybe he disappeared entirely. And the mind immediately tries to solve it with logic. He's over it. He doesn't care. He found someone else. I meant nothing. But what if what you're seeing isn't indifference? It's defense. What if avoidance is not the absence of feeling but the presence of fear? Because here is the uncomfortable truth about the divine masculine in separation. When he withdraws, it is rarely because the connection lacked depth. It is usually because it had too much. Avoidance is a coping strategy. When emotions feel manageable, people communicate. When emotions feel overwhelming, people escape. Think about it. If something lightly interests you, you explore it calmly. If something shakes your identity, challenges your wounds, and exposes your vulnerabilities, your nervous system reacts. And the divine masculine's nervous system often reads this connection as a threat, not because you are dangerous, but because the transformation required is. This kind of bond doesn't allow him to stay who he was. It demands growth. It demands accountability. It demands emotional honesty. And if he has spent years surviving by suppressing emotion, prioritizing logic, building pride, or avoiding vulnerability, then being with you feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. You represent the jump, and he is terrified of falling. From your perspective, it feels like rejection. From his perspective, it feels like losing control. That difference matters. Control is often the hidden addiction of the unawakened masculine. Control over emotions. Control over outcomes. Control over image. Control over who gets access to his inner world. But this connection bypassed control. It slipped past his defenses. You saw him. Not the curated version. Not the confident exterior. Not the emotionally armored persona. You saw the fear. You saw the softness. You saw the insecurity beneath the strength. And once someone feels seen at that depth, there are only two options. Lean in. Or run. He ran. But here's what no one talks about. Running does not equal freedom. When he stepped back, he may have told himself he needed space. He may have rationalized it as timing issues. He may have blamed external circumstances. He may have convinced himself it was too complicated. But the connection did not dissolve just because he withdrew. Followed him. Into his thoughts. Into his dreams. Into moments of stillness he didn't expect. Avoidance is not the erasure of emotion. It is the postponement of confrontation. And postponement builds pressure. Imagine someone trying to hold a beach ball underwater. First, it feels manageable. You push it down. You apply pressure. You convince yourself it will stay there. But the deeper you force it, the stronger the resistance becomes. Eventually, your arms shake. Eventually, you lose grip. Eventually, it explodes to the surface. That beach ball is his emotion. And silence is the water. The longer he avoids, the more energy it takes to maintain the illusion of detachment. Because make no mistake, it is an illusion. If he truly felt nothing, he wouldn't need distance. Distance is only necessary when proximity threatens emotional exposure. Here's a scenario. He's out with friends. Laughing. Distracted. He appears fine. Present. Engaged. But then someone says something that reminds him of you. A phrase you used. Place you went. A shared memory. For a split second he goes quiet. No one notices. But internally something tightens. That is not indifference. That is suppression. Another moment. It's late at night. No noise. No obligations. No performance required. He scrolls absent-mindedly. Your name appears in his mind. He wonders what you're doing. He wonders if you're talking to someone else. He wonders if you've moved on. His ego immediately interrupts. Don't think about that. She'll reach out if she wants to. It's better this way. But the thought lingers. Because avoidance silences communication, not connection. And that is the part he cannot escape. The illusion of avoidance works best when you're chasing. When you're texting. When you're asking for clarity. When you're trying to fix it. When you're energetically leaning forward. Because then he can stay in reaction mode. He can tell himself he's responding to pressure. But when you go quiet, when you stop seeking validation, when you detach emotionally and focus on yourself, the illusion cracks. Because now he is alone with his choice. And choices feel heavier in silence. Here's a deeper layer. Many divine masculines were conditioned to disconnect from emotion early in life. Be strong. Don't cry. Handle it. Move on. Vulnerability was weakness. Emotional expression was unsafe. So when this connection activates deep attachment, longing, even spiritual recognition, it collides with old programming. And the nervous system panics. Not because he doesn't care, but because caring feels destabilizing. Avoidance becomes self-protection. He tells himself he is regaining balance. But in reality, he is fragmenting internally. Because part of him knows the truth. You are not just another experience. You are a catalyst. And catalysts disrupt. They don't allow comfort. They don't allow stagnation. They don't allow emotional numbness to remain intact. That's why avoidance feels necessary to him. Because staying would require transformation. Leaving only requires delay. But delay is temporary. Always. Let me ask you something. If he truly moved on, why does he still watch from a distance? If he truly feels nothing, why does he hesitate before deleting your number? If he truly detached, why does he compare others to you? If he truly found peace, why does your name still create a shift in his body? Avoidance is convincing, but it is not authentic. It is strategy, not resolution. And strategies collapse when they are no longer effective. The illusion also protects his ego, because reaching out first would mean admitting he feels something, admitting he misjudged, admitting he was afraid, admitting you matter. An ego resists surrender, especially when pride has been guarding the door. But here's the paradox. The more he tries to protect his pride, the more restless he becomes. Because pride cannot silence soul recognition forever. Eventually, something within him begins to question the narrative he built. Was I wrong? Did I overreact? Why does this still feel unfinished? Why can't I replicate this connection? Those questions are the beginning of awakening. And awakening dissolves avoidance. You might not see it yet. You might only feel the absence. You might still interpret the silence as final. But internally, something is shifting. Avoidance requires energy. And energy depletes. Especially when the truth keeps resurfacing. He can distract himself temporarily. He can date others temporarily. He can bury himself in work temporarily. But temporary solutions cannot resolve permanent connections. And this bond, whether he names it or not, feels permanent. That is what unsettles him. Not you. The permanence. The inevitability. The sense that this story isn't finished. The illusion of avoidance thrives in ego. But ego weakens under emotional truth. And right now, even if you cannot see it, he is wrestling with that truth. Because running created space. And space created reflection. And reflection leads to confrontation. And confrontation leads to choice. Avoid you forever. Or face what this connection really means. And deep down he knows something. Avoiding you doesn't erase you. It only delays himself. And delay has a limit. The illusion is fading. The silence is thinning. And what looked like indifference is slowly being revealed as unfinished emotion waiting for courage. What if the reason he can't escape you is because he can't escape himself? There is something about this connection that defies logic. You may be in different cities, different relationships, different phases of life. You may not speak for weeks or months, and yet, at the most unexpected moments you feel him. A sudden wave of emotion, a thought that doesn't feel like yours, a dream so vivid it lingers all day, an unexplainable pull toward his energy. And you ask yourself, why now? Because this connection was never just physical. It was never just situational. It was energetic. And energy mirrors. The divine masculine and divine feminine dynamic functions like two opposing poles of the same magnet. Separate them and the pull does not disappear. It intensifies. Try to force them together prematurely, and resistance increases. But when both align internally, attraction becomes effortless. This is the mirror effect. He mirrors your wounds. You mirror his fears. He mirrors your insecurities. You mirror his avoidance. And when one of you shifts, the other feels it. This is why the separation phase feels so disorienting. It is not simply two people taking space. It is two nervous systems recalibrating, two souls reorganizing, two identities being dismantled and rebuilt. You may think you're healing quietly, but he feels the shift. Let's go deeper. In the beginning, you may have chased. You may have reached out. You may have tried to fix, explain, hold the connection together. That energy created a dynamic, you leaning forward, him leaning back. Push and pull. The classic dance. But something changed. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was heartbreak. Maybe it was clarity. Maybe it was self-respect finally rising to the surface. You stopped chasing. You started choosing yourself. You poured your energy into healing, into growth, into peace. You detached. Not out of anger, but out of alignment. And that's when the mirror activated differently. Because when you pull your energy back, he feels the absence. Not always consciously, but energetically. Imagine you've been standing in sunlight for hours. You grow used to its warmth. You stop noticing it. It becomes normal. Now imagine that sunlight suddenly disappears. The absence becomes obvious. The cold becomes noticeable. The silence becomes louder. That is what happens when the divine feminine detaches authentically. He may not understand why he suddenly feels restless. He may not connect it to you at first. But something feels off. Because the energy he relied on, your pursuit, your emotional availability, your constant presence, has shifted. And the mirror now reflects something new. Your independence. Your self-containment. Your peace without him. And that reflection challenges him more than your longing ever did. Here's a subtle truth. When you chase, he can stay asleep. When you detach, he begins to wake up. Because chasing allows him to remain reactive. He doesn't have to initiate. He doesn't have to confront his feelings. He can simply respond or withdraw. But when you become still, genuinely still, the dynamic changes. There is no pressure to resist. There is no energy to push against. There is only space. And space forces introspection. Let's paint a scenario. He's going about his routine, work, responsibilities, social life. He convinces himself everything is fine. But something feels quieter than usual. You're no longer watching his stories. You're no longer sending subtle signals. You're no longer energetically reaching. And for the first time, he feels the weight of your absence. Not the dramatic absence of a fight, the calm absence of release. And release is terrifying, because release implies you may not come back. And the mirror reflects that possibility clearly. The energetic mirror effect also exposes unresolved wounds. If he struggles with abandonment, your detachment activates it. If he struggles with vulnerability, your silence challenges it. If he struggles with control, your independence destabilizes it. The mirror doesn't lie. It reflects what needs healing. And healing is uncomfortable. That discomfort is often misinterpreted as irritation, confusion, or even anger. But beneath those surface emotions lies something softer. Fear of losing something irreplaceable. Have you noticed how your healing sometimes triggers unexpected shifts in him? You begin focusing on self-love. Suddenly he appears in your dreams. You start dating someone new with genuine openness. Suddenly he reaches out. You finally reach a place of peace. Suddenly you feel his energy intensely. Coincidence? Or energetic recalibration? Because when one twin evolves, the other feels the imbalance. Growth is magnetic. And transformation cannot go unnoticed in a soul bond dynamic. The mirror also works in reverse. When he feels emotional surges, you may sense them too. You might wake up missing him intensely out of nowhere. You might feel sudden sadness or longing without external triggers. You might feel anxiety that doesn't logically belong to you. This is not weakness. It is energetic resonance. Two frequencies once deeply intertwined don't untangle instantly. They echo. But here's the key. The mirror effect does not exist to keep you attached. It exists to force alignment. If you heal insecurity, he must confront his. If you release fear, he must face his avoidance. If you embody self-worth, he must reconcile his pride. The mirror demands balance. And balance requires growth on both sides. Let's ask the hard question. Why can't he avoid you anymore? Because every time he tries, the mirror reflects back what he hasn't healed. He may enter another relationship and notice the depth is missing. He may distract himself with work and feel emotionally unfulfilled. He may convince himself he prefers independence and still feel incomplete. Not because you are the only person in the world, but because you activated something spiritual, psychological, and emotional that cannot be undone. You awakened awareness. And awareness cannot be reversed. The mirror effect intensifies when ego begins to crack. At first, he may blame circumstances. Then he may blame timing. Then he may blame incompatibility. But eventually, when reflection deepens, he begins to question himself. What if I ran because I was afraid? What if I misjudged the intensity? What if I sabotaged something real? Those questions are not random. They are signs of internal mirroring. Because the connection forces self-examination. And self-examination dismantles avoidance. But here's something important. The mirror only works effectively when you stop trying to control the outcome. If you detach with the hidden intention of triggering him, the energy remains entangled. If you heal just to make him come back, the mirror reflects manipulation. True energetic shift happens when you choose yourself without expectation. When your healing is genuine. When your peace is authentic. When your detachment is rooted in self-respect, not strategy. That authenticity creates the strongest energetic ripple, because authenticity cannot be faked, and he feels that difference. The divine masculine can avoid conversations. He can avoid messages. He can avoid vulnerability, but he cannot avoid the mirror forever, because the mirror exists within him. Every time he thinks of you unexpectedly, every time he compares someone to you, every time he feels unfinished business, every time he wonders if you're gone for good, that is the mirror speaking. And mirrors don't chase, they reflect. So if you're wondering why the silence feels charged lately, if you sense something shifting beneath the surface, if you feel his energy stronger when you're the most detached, it's because the mirror is doing its work. Transformation is rarely loud at first. It starts quietly, with reflection, with discomfort, with realization. And realization is the beginning of return. Not necessarily physical return immediately, but emotional return, self-return, awakening. Because once someone truly sees themselves clearly, avoidance becomes impossible. And when he finally looks into that mirror without turning away, he won't just see you. He'll see the truth he's been trying to outrun. And that truth has gravity. And gravity always pulls things back into alignment. There comes a moment in every period of avoidance when silence stops feeling powerful and starts feeling heavy. First, distance gives him relief. Relief from intensity. Relief from emotional exposure. Relief from the vulnerability he didn't know how to handle. He tells himself he made the right choice. He convinces himself he needed clarity. He frames the separation as maturity. And for a while that narrative works. But avoidance has a shelf life. And eventually the internal pressure becomes impossible to ignore. The breaking point doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't usually happen in a single explosive realization. It builds quietly, like cracks forming beneath a surface that still appears solid. On the outside he may look fine. He goes to work. He handles responsibilities. He laughs with friends. He keeps moving. But internally something has shifted. The distractions don't hit the same. The new conversations don't feel as deep. The temporary comforts feel exactly that, temporary. And in moments of stillness, he feels something he didn't expect. Unresolved emotion. Let's be honest about something. The divine masculine often believes he can outthink his feelings. If he analyzes the situation enough, if he rationalizes the separation enough, if he reframes the connection as too complicated, he can shrink it into something manageable. But the heart doesn't operate on logic, and the body keeps score. He may silence his mind during the day, but at night, when there's no one to impress, no one to distract, no role to play, the truth rises. He remembers your voice. He remembers how safe he felt when he let his guard down. He remembers the depth, the kind he can't easily replicate. And the realization unsettles him. He didn't lose something casual. He walked away from something transformative. Here's where the breaking point begins. When pride starts losing to longing. First, pride is loud. Don't reach out. You'll look weak. She should contact you. You did what was best. But longing is patient. Longing doesn't argue. It lingers. It sits in his chest unexpectedly. It surfaces in random memories. It tightens his throat when he thinks about closure that never happened. And over time, longing becomes louder than pride. Imagine this scene. He's driving alone at night. No music. Just the hum of the road. Your name enters his mind without warning. He tries to shake it off. But then another thought follows. What if she's really moving on? That thought hits differently. Because moving on means permanence. And permanence forces accountability. It forces him to confront the possibility that his silence cost him something real. And that possibility cracks the ego. The breaking point often begins with comparison. He may try dating someone else. He may attempt to recreate connection. But something feels flat. The chemistry is there maybe. The attraction is there maybe. But the depth? The spiritual familiarity? The feeling of being seen without performance? Missing. And that absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. Because now he has contrast. And contrast brings clarity. There is also another layer, the emotional backlog. When someone avoids feeling, those emotions don't disappear. They accumulate. Regret, curiosity, desire, fear, guilt. They stack up quietly behind the wall of silence. Until one day the wall doesn't feel stable anymore. He may experience irritability for no clear reason, restlessness that doesn't make sense, a subtle dissatisfaction with his life that he can't pinpoint, because unresolved connection lingers in the subconscious. And the subconscious always seeks resolution. Let's ask the deeper question. What scares him most? It's not you. It's the vulnerability required to return. Because reaching out means admitting he felt the loss. It means acknowledging he ran. It means risking rejection. And for someone who avoids emotional exposure, that feels terrifying. But here's the paradox. The fear of vulnerability eventually becomes smaller than the pain of silence. That's the breaking point. When maintaining distance hurts more than bridging it. When pretending indifference feels heavier than telling the truth. When ego becomes exhausting. There may be small signs before the external shift. He checks your social media more often. He types a message and deletes it. He dreams about conversations that never happened. He replays old memories not with anger, but with softness. That softness is new. Because anger protects pride. Softness signals awakening. The breaking point is rarely about dramatic love confessions. It's about internal surrender. It's about him sitting alone and finally admitting, I still care. That admission might not be spoken aloud, but it changes everything. Because once he allows himself to feel fully, even privately, avoidance loses its grip. Suppression only works when you deny the emotion exists. Once acknowledged, it demands movement. And here's something important. The breaking point often aligns with your growth. When you truly detach. When you stop waiting anxiously. When your energy feels sovereign, he senses the shift, and it intensifies his reflection, because now he doesn't feel you holding space for him in the same way. And that absence feels final. Finality triggers clarity. Clarity triggers urgency. Have you ever noticed how sometimes, just when you're finally at peace, you feel his energy surge? That's not coincidence. That's internal pressure reaching the surface. Because while you were healing externally, he was processing internally. Slowly, quietly, uncomfortably. And now the buildup is nearing release. The breaking point can look different for every divine masculine. For some, it's a moment of jealousy. For others, it's a dream so vivid it shakes them. For others, it's watching you glow without them. For others, it's hitting a life milestone and realizing the one person they want to share it with isn't there. But in every case, it comes down to the same realization. Avoiding her didn't erase the connection. It only delayed facing it. Let's go even deeper. The breaking point is not just about missing you. It's about recognizing himself in relation to you. Recognizing that he sabotaged out of fear. Recognizing that he projected insecurity. Recognizing that he chose comfort over courage. That kind of self-awareness is painful, but it's transformative. Because once someone sees their pattern clearly, they can no longer hide behind ignorance. And awareness demands choice. Continue running, or step forward. This is where silence begins to crack. Not because you forced it, not because you begged, not because you proved your worth, but because internally, he can no longer sustain the narrative that distance equals peace. Distance equals unrest. And unrest seeks resolution. The breaking point within him is not weakness. It's awakening. It's the moment pride bows to truth. It's the moment he admits the connection mattered. It's the moment he realizes silence didn't protect him. It isolated him. And isolation is lonely, especially when you felt soul recognition once before. Right now, you may not see the shift. You may still feel the quiet. But internally, the walls are thinning. The pride is softening. The suppression is tiring. And the heart is speaking louder. Because silence can delay confession, but it cannot silence emotion forever. And when the breaking point fully arrives, the divine masculine won't reach out because he feels pressured. He'll reach out because he finally understands. He wasn't avoiding you. He was avoiding himself. And he can't do that anymore. First, running feels effective. Distance creates relief. Silence creates space. Distraction creates numbness. He convinces himself that stepping away was strength, that choosing independence over intensity was maturity, that avoiding vulnerability was self-protection. And in the beginning it works. The calls stop. The emotional tension fades. The immediate pressure disappears. He breathes easier. But relief is not resolution. And eventually, the strategy that once felt empowering begins to unravel. Because running only works when what you're running from stays behind. And this connection doesn't stay behind. He may try to outrun it through productivity, long hours, new projects, ambition turned up to maximum volume. Work becomes refuge. Achievement becomes distraction. Success becomes armor. But there's a subtle problem with that approach. The more he achieves externally, the louder the internal emptiness becomes. Because achievement does not replace intimacy. Recognition does not replace resonance. Being admired is not the same as being understood. And you understood him. That memory lingers. Maybe he tries another route. Rebound connections. Casual conversations. Attention from someone new. The thrill of novelty. For a moment it feels refreshing. Different energy. Different dynamics. Less emotional weight. But novelty fades quickly. And when it does, comparison begins. Not intentionally. Not consciously at first. But subtly. The way you looked at him. The way conversations with you felt layered. The way silence with you wasn't uncomfortable. The way you challenged him without diminishing him. He notices the absence of depth. And depth, once experienced, becomes the standard. That's when running begins to lose its power. Because you weren't just a person. You were an activation. You triggered something beyond surface compatibility. You stirred dormant emotions. You exposed hidden fears. You awakened self-awareness he wasn't prepared for. And once awakened, awareness cannot be undone. He can try to recreate chemistry, but he cannot unfeel recognition. He can try to move forward, but he cannot unknow what he experienced. Here's the truth about avoidance. It requires constant maintenance. It requires rewriting the story repeatedly. It wasn't that serious. It was bad timing. It wouldn't have worked. She was too intense. He must rehearse these narratives internally to justify distance. But repetition weakens when reality contradicts it. Because every time he feels your absence deeply, the story cracks. Every time he wonders what you're doing, the narrative trembles. Every time he feels jealousy at the thought of you moving on, the illusion collapses a little more. Running requires energy. And energy drains. Let's talk about the nervous system. When something feels overwhelming, the body chooses fight, flight, or freeze. He chose flight. But the body cannot remain in flight forever. Eventually, exhaustion sets in. Avoiding emotional confrontation requires constant vigilance, constant distraction, constant redirection of thought. And over time that becomes tiring. He begins to notice subtle dissatisfaction. He feels restless without understanding why. He feels incomplete without admitting it. He feels like something unfinished lingers behind him. Because unfinished emotional business doesn't dissolve with distance. It waits. Imagine someone trying to outrun their own shadow. During the day, with enough movement and noise, they might forget it's there. But when they stop, the shadow is right beside them. No matter where he goes, the emotional imprint remains. The songs you shared, the conversations that shifted him, the arguments that revealed vulnerability, the moments of intimacy that felt safe. Memory becomes persistent. And memory is powerful. There's another layer to why running stops working. You changed. At first, he may have expected you to remain emotionally available indefinitely. To wait. To reach out. To hold the door open. But when your energy shifts, when you detach authentically, the dynamic transforms. Suddenly, he doesn't feel pursued. He feels distance. Real distance. And real distance feels different from silence he controls. Because when he controlled the silence, he felt safe. When you create the silence, he feels uncertain. Uncertainty destabilizes avoidance. Let's consider this moment. He notices you're no longer reacting. No longer checking in. No longer energetically leaning toward him. He senses your independence. Your groundedness. Your glow. and something inside him tightens, because the possibility of losing you permanently becomes real. And permanence forces honesty. Running works best when you assume the door remains open. But when the door begins to close, the urgency shifts. Suddenly, it's not about avoiding intensity. It's about confronting loss. Another reason running stops working? Growth. Time creates perspective. What once felt overwhelming may now feel meaningful. What once felt scary may now feel rare. As he matures emotionally, even subtly, he begins to reinterpret the connection. Instead of seeing it as chaos, he sees depth. Instead of seeing it as pressure, he sees potential. Instead of seeing it as threat, he sees opportunity. That shift doesn't happen overnight, but it happens. And when it does, running feels immature. Avoidance feels small. Silence feels like a mistake. There's also the spiritual layer. Some connections feel ordinary. They come and go. They teach small lessons. They fade easily. But this kind of bond lingers. It resurfaces. It echoes in intuition. It appears in dreams. It nudges at unexpected times. He may not label it spiritual. He may not use mystical language. But he feels the gravity. And gravity cannot be outrun. The more he resists, the stronger it pulls. Let's ask a direct question. If running truly worked, would he still think about you? If distance truly healed everything, would he still feel triggered by your absence? If avoidance truly brought peace, would he still feel unfinished? Running stops working when the cost outweighs the comfort. When loneliness outweighs pride. When longing outweighs ego. When silence feels heavier than vulnerability. Eventually, he reaches a quiet realization. I'm not running from her. I'm running from what she makes me feel. And that distinction changes everything. Because you are not the threat. Transformation is. Growth is. Emotional exposure is. And once he recognizes that, the path forward becomes clear. He cannot outrun evolution. He cannot outrun self-awareness. He cannot outrun emotional truth. Running was a phase. A coping mechanism. A temporary shield. But shields are meant for moments of danger. Not lifelong defense. And you are not danger. You are depth. You are reflection. You are emotional expansion. And expansion feels uncomfortable before it feels empowering. Here's the final layer. The more he runs, the more he circles back internally. Because this connection exists in his psyche, in his emotional blueprint, in his memory, and in his subconscious understanding of love. He can delay confrontation, but he cannot delete imprint. An imprint becomes calling. Calling becomes restlessness. Restlessness becomes realization. And realization becomes action. Running stops working the moment he understands something undeniable. Distance didn't free him. It just postponed the inevitable reckoning with his own heart. And once that truth settles in, even quietly, avoidance loses its appeal. Because courage, though terrifying, begins to look easier than regret. And regret is heavier than vulnerability. The silence that once felt protective now feels suffocating. The distance that once felt safe now feels isolating. And the running that once felt powerful now feels pointless. Because no matter how far he goes, the connection remains. And eventually he stops running, not because he's forced to, but because he realizes he was never escaping you. He was escaping himself. And that escape has reached its limit. There is a moment in this journey that feels subtle on the outside but seismic on the inside. It's the moment you stop chasing. Not because you stopped caring. Not because the love disappeared. But because something within you finally says, enough. Enough waiting for breadcrumbs. Enough analyzing silence. Enough shrinking yourself to make someone comfortable. Enough carrying the emotional weight alone. And in that moment, everything changes. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But energetically. At first, your detachment may feel like grief. You miss him. You question yourself. You feel the ache of letting go of expectations. But beneath the sadness, something powerful is forming. Self-respect. And self-respect shifts dynamics in ways chasing never could. Because when you chase, you operate from fear of loss. When you detach, you operate from alignment. And alignment is magnetic. Let's be clear. Detachment is not indifference. It is not pretending you don't care. It is not suppressing your feelings. True detachment is emotional sovereignty. It is saying, I love you, but I love myself enough not to beg. It is understanding that connection cannot thrive on imbalance. It is choosing peace over pursuit. And when you reach that state genuinely, the energetic cord recalibrates. Because the dynamic that once fed on push and pull no longer exists. Before, he leaned back because you leaned forward. Before, he felt safe knowing you were emotionally available no matter how distant he became. Before, he could avoid accountability because you carried the hope. But when you release that role, he feels it. Not through a dramatic announcement. Not because you tell him, but because your energy is no longer reaching for him. Energy withdrawal is powerful. It creates space. And space forces reflection. Imagine holding a rope in a tug-of-war. As long as both people pull, there is tension. But what happens when one person drops the rope? The other stumbles, loses balance, feels the sudden absence of resistance. That's what detachment does. He may not consciously understand why he feels unsettled, but something shifts. The chase energy is gone. The emotional safety net is gone. The assurance that you'll always be there uncertain. And uncertainty activates awareness. There's another layer here. When you detach authentically, you redirect your energy inward. You focus on healing your abandonment wound. You build your confidence. You rediscover joy outside the connection. You invest in friendships, passions, growth. You begin glowing differently. And that glow is undeniable. Because it's not fueled by validation. It's fueled by wholeness. And wholeness is magnetic. The divine masculine feels that shift deeply. Even if he doesn't have language for it. He senses that you're no longer waiting in the same way. He senses that you're not emotionally dependent on his next move. He senses that your life continues beautifully without him. And that realization challenges his sense of control. Because previously the dynamic was predictable. Now it isn't. And unpredictability destabilizes avoidance. Here's something important. When you detach, you stop reacting to silence. You stop interpreting every delay as rejection. You stop assigning meaning to every small action. You step out of hypervigilance. That calmness changes the energetic tone. Before, silence created anxiety. Now silence creates neutrality. And neutrality is powerful. Because it removes emotional leverage. Let's go deeper. Your detachment also sends a subconscious message. I am worthy of mutual effort. That message may never be spoken aloud. But it reverberates. Because when someone senses that you value yourself, they begin to question whether they are showing up adequately. And if they aren't, discomfort arises. Not because you demanded more, but because you stopped accepting less. He may notice small things. You no longer check his social media. You no longer respond instantly. You no longer initiate conversations. You no longer seem emotionally rattled. First, he might interpret it as pride, then as anger, then as indifference. But eventually clarity emerges. It's not hostility. It's growth. And growth is confronting. Detachment also exposes truth. When you stop chasing, he can no longer blame your intensity for his withdrawal. He can no longer justify distance as reaction. Now the silence belongs fully to him. And ownership is uncomfortable. Because ownership requires accountability. He must confront his choice without distraction, without pressure, without emotional noise. And in that quiet space, reflection deepens. Have you ever noticed how sometimes, just when you're genuinely moving forward, he reappears? That's not manipulation. That's energetic recalibration. When your energy pulls back, the magnetic field shifts. Because the dynamic was never about control. It was about balance. And balance demands reciprocity. When you stop overextending, he feels the vacuum. And vacuums pull. But here's the key. Your detachment must be real. If you detach with the secret intention of triggering him, the energy remains tangled. If you pretend not to care while obsessing internally, the cord stays active in the same way. True detachment is peaceful. It's quiet confidence. It's surrender to timing. It's trusting that what is meant for you will meet you halfway. And that peace radiates. There's also empowerment in detachment. You realize you are not waiting to be chosen. You are choosing yourself. You understand that your value does not fluctuate based on his attention. You remember that love should feel safe, not anxious. That awareness elevates your frequency. And elevation changes the entire dynamic. Because now, he is not the center of your emotional world. You are. And that shifts power naturally. Let's ask the deeper question. Why does your detachment affect him so strongly? Because for the first time, he feels the possibility of losing you permanently. When you were chasing, he assumed continuity. When you detach, continuity becomes uncertain. And uncertainty awakens appreciation. Sometimes people only recognize depth when absence threatens permanence. That doesn't mean you play games. It means your self-respect clarifies reality. Detachment also frees you. You sleep better. You think less obsessively. You feel more grounded. You begin imagining a future that doesn't depend solely on his return. And ironically, that freedom makes reunion possible in a healthier way. Because now if he returns, it's not out of desperation. It's out of choice. And if he doesn't, you remain whole. That is power. There's something spiritually profound about this stage. When you detach, you align with trust. You release control. You surrender timelines. You allow divine orchestration, or simply natural consequence, to unfold. That surrender creates space for authentic action. Because now, if he reaches out, it's not because you force momentum. It's because internal realization compelled him. Your detachment changes everything because it shifts the foundation of the connection. It transforms imbalance into equilibrium. It transforms desperation into dignity. It transforms anxiety into peace. And peace is attractive. Not in a manipulative way. In a grounded way. Right now you may feel like you've lost something. But what you've actually gained is sovereignty. You are no longer reacting. You are no longer chasing clarity. You are no longer trying to fix what requires mutual effort. You are standing still. And in stillness, power returns to you. And here's the beautiful irony. The moment you no longer need him to reach out is often the moment he feels compelled to. Because energy responds to balance. Because love responds to self-worth. Because silence cannot survive where sovereignty exists. Your detachment is not the end of the story. It is the turning point. It is the moment the dynamic recalibrates. It is the moment you stop carrying both sides. And it is the moment he must decide. Step forward. Or truly let go. Either way you win. Because you chose yourself. And when you choose yourself fully, the entire connection transforms. There comes a moment, quiet, unexpected, almost invisible from the outside, when everything inside him shifts. Not because you forced it. Not because you convinced him. Not because you explained one more time how deeply you feel. But because something within him can no longer stay asleep. Up until this point, the divine masculine may have convinced himself that he was in control. That distance was strength. That silence was protection. That ignoring the connection was maturity. He told himself stories. It wasn't that deep. It was just chemistry. I need to focus on my life. She's too emotional. This is too intense. And for a while those stories worked. They kept him safe. They kept him moving. They kept him distracted. But awakening does not happen when life is comfortable. It happens when distraction stops working. It happens when silence becomes louder than noise. It happens when the soul refuses to be ignored. And this is where the trigger begins. The subtle cracks in the ego. Awakening rarely arrives like lightning. It begins like a crack in glass. Small. Almost unnoticeable. Maybe it starts with a dream. He sees you clearly. Not as memory but as presence. He wakes up with your energy lingering in the room. His chest feels tight. His mind searches for logic. Why am I dreaming about her again? He shakes it off. Then a song plays, one that reminds him of you. He changes it quickly. But the feeling lingers. He scrolls through social media. Your name appears unexpectedly. Not because he searched, but because the universe has strange timing. Coincidence? He tells himself it is. But how many coincidences does it take before the ego starts to lose its authority? The divine masculine awakening isn't dramatic at first. It's inconvenient. It interrupts his mental narrative. It questions his detachment. It exposes the lie that he has moved on. And every time he tries to suppress it, it returns stronger. Because the soul does not whisper forever. When your absence becomes a presence. Here is the paradox. Your silence becomes louder than your voice ever was. When you were reaching out, explaining, expressing, loving openly, he had something to resist, something to push against, something to avoid. But when you pull your energy back, when you stop chasing, when you stop checking his page, stop sending subtle signals, stop reacting, you remove the resistance. And suddenly he feels something new. Space. And that space becomes unbearable. Because in that space there is no distraction from himself. He begins to feel your absence not as relief but as loss. He notices the way no one else quite understands him the way you did. He notices how conversations feel surface level. He notices how connections lack depth. He may even enter other relationships, but something feels off, forced, incomplete. Why? Because awakening begins when comparison exposes truth. You were not just another person. You were a mirror. And now that the mirror is gone, he has to face himself directly. The ego versus the heart. Inside him a war begins. The ego says, "Don't reach out. You'll look weak. She moved on. You'll lose control. You were fine before her." But the heart says, "This matters. This was real. You miss her. You're not done." The divine masculine awakening is not about romantic fantasy. It is about internal confrontation. He begins to realize that avoiding you wasn't strength. It was fear. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of emotional exposure. Fear of not being enough. Fear of losing control. And here's the deeper truth. Many divine masculine energies were conditioned to suppress emotion, to lead with logic, to equate vulnerability with weakness. So when he met you, someone who felt everything deeply, it destabilized him. You didn't just love him. You activated him. And activation feels like chaos before it feels like clarity. The trigger event. Often, awakening accelerates because of a catalyst. Could be a major life change, a breakup, a loss, a moment of failure, a sudden wave of loneliness. In that vulnerable state, defenses weaken. And that's when truth seeps in. He may sit alone one night and finally allow himself to feel what he's been suppressing. He replays conversations. He remembers the way you looked at him. He remembers how safe he felt, even if he didn't admit it. And then comes the realization. I pushed away the one person who saw me. That thought is heavy, because awakening is not comfortable. Comes with accountability. It forces him to see how his avoidance hurt you, how his silence created confusion, how his pride cost him connection. And for the first time, he doesn't blame you. He sees himself. That is the true trigger. When avoidance feels like self-betrayal. Before awakening, running felt like survival. After awakening begins, running feels like self-betrayal. He starts to feel misaligned with his own choices. Why am I pretending I don't care? Why am I resisting something that felt authentic? Why am I choosing ego over truth? These questions disturb his peace. He may appear normal externally, going to work, socializing, functioning. But internally, there is restlessness. Because once awareness begins, it cannot be reversed. You can ignore a feeling, but you cannot unknow it. And now he knows. He knows the connection was different. He knows you touched parts of him no one else did. He knows his silence wasn't indifference. It was fear. The masculine awakening is slow, but irreversible. This isn't a fairy tale moment where he suddenly becomes perfect. Awakening is layered. He may reach out subtly at first. A small message, a reaction to a story, a casual check-in, testing the waters. Not because he is playing games, but because he is recalibrating. He is learning how to approach you without the armor he once wore. And that takes courage. Because vulnerability is new territory. He must dismantle years of emotional conditioning. He must admit to himself that he cares. He must face the possibility of rejection. Awakening requires humility. And humility cracks the ego wide open. Why you didn't have to force this. Here is what you must understand. You did not cause his awakening. You triggered it, but you did not control it. The shift happened because you stopped over-functioning in the dynamic. When you chose yourself, when you chose peace, when you stopped trying to fix him, you created the energetic space necessary for him to confront himself. Sometimes love doesn't awaken someone through pursuit. Sometimes it awakens them through absence. And your growth became his mirror. When he saw you stable without him, glowing without him, grounded without him, it forced reflection. Not jealousy, reflection. Because he began to ask, how is she okay without me? And the deeper layer of that question is, why am I not okay without her? That is awakening. The moment he realizes he can't avoid you anymore, there will be a point where resistance exhausts him, where pretending costs more than honesty, where silence feels heavier than communication. And in that moment, something inside him softens. Not dramatically, not publicly, but internally. He stops fighting the connection. He stops dismissing the bond. He stops labeling it as too much. Instead, he acknowledges, this changed me. And once a man admits that a connection changed him, he can no longer treat it casually. He may still move cautiously. He may still fear vulnerability, but he cannot go back to indifference, because awakening has already happened. The truth about timing. You may wonder, why did it take so long? Because awakening happens at the pace of readiness. You were ready earlier. He wasn't. Not because he didn't care, but because growth demands discomfort. And not everyone chooses discomfort quickly. But once he reaches that threshold, the silence begins to lose its power, and honesty begins to feel like relief. The divine masculine awakening is not about romance. It is about integration. It is the merging of logic and emotion, strength and vulnerability, ego and soul. And when that integration begins, avoidance becomes impossible, because you are no longer just a person he can ignore. You are a mirror he cannot unsee. And once someone sees themselves clearly, they either run forever, or they rise. The awakening determines which path he chooses. But one thing is certain, the silence cannot survive self-awareness. And once awareness arrives, everything changes. There is a distinct energy shift when the silence begins to dissolve. It doesn't always start with a message. It doesn't begin with a confession. It doesn't arrive with dramatic declarations of love. It begins subtly, like a current changing direction beneath still water. If you've been in separation, you know how heavy silence can feel. It stretches across days, weeks, sometimes months. At first, the quiet feels sharp like rejection. Then it becomes dull like numbness. Eventually, you may even adapt to it. But here's the truth. Silence has a lifespan. And when the divine masculine begins to awaken internally, that silence starts to crack. Not loudly, but unmistakably. Let's explore the signs, not from fantasy, but from energetic, psychological, and spiritual shifts that happen when avoidance can no longer sustain itself. 1. The energetic pull intensifies. Before communication resumes in the physical world, it often resumes in the energetic one. You may start thinking about him more frequently but differently than before. Not obsessively, not anxiously, just suddenly. A random wave of his presence crosses your mind. You feel him at odd hours. You wake up from dreams that feel vivid and emotionally charged. You may even feel sudden emotions that don't seem to originate from you. Restlessness, longing, nostalgia. Why? Because when he starts allowing himself to feel, the energetic cord becomes active again. When he suppresses, the connection feels blocked. When he opens even slightly, the current flows. Have you ever noticed how sometimes, the moment you feel completely at peace, he pops into your awareness? That's not coincidence. That's resonance. The silence begins to thin energetically before it dissolves physically. 2. Subtle digital signals. In modern connections, silence rarely means complete disappearance. You may notice, he starts watching your stories again. He accidentally likes an old post. He views your profile more frequently. He becomes present in digital spaces where he knows you exist. These actions may seem small, even insignificant. But ask yourself, if he truly felt nothing, why check? The ego resists direct vulnerability, so it tests. He may not feel ready to speak, but he wants to feel close. So he observes. From a distance. This is often the first physical layer crack in the silence. It's not about social media itself. It's about proximity. He is recalibrating how close he can be without fully exposing himself. And that proximity signals internal movement. 3. The sudden casual message. When the silence truly begins to end, communication often resumes in the most understated way possible. Hey, how have you been? I saw something that reminded me of you. Hope you're doing well. Simple, neutral, controlled. But beneath that simplicity is something far deeper. Courage. Do not underestimate how much internal negotiation it took for him to send that message. He likely typed it, deleted it, rewrote it, overthought it. The divine masculine does not break silence impulsively once awakening has begun. He does it carefully, because now it matters. And here's the subtle shift. The tone feels different. Less defensive. Less reactive. Less guarded. More present. Even if he doesn't express everything immediately, you can feel it, the sincerity behind the words. The silence doesn't shatter. It softens. 4. Emotional vulnerability emerging. One of the clearest signs the silence is ending is emotional depth returning. In the past, conversations may have felt surface level. But now, he may ask deeper questions. He may reference past moments. He may admit confusion. He may even apologize indirectly at first. I wasn't in the right headspace. I didn't handle things well. I needed time to figure things out. These statements reveal accountability. And accountability only comes after awakening. A man who is still asleep in his ego will blame, deflect, or minimize. A man who is awakening begins to reflect. He may not use spiritual language. He may not call it growth. But you will feel the difference. Because the walls are thinner. And the heart is closer to the surface. 5. Increased synchronicities. As the silence dissolves, synchronicities often intensify. You think of him, he messages. You dream of him, he reaches out the next day. You release attachment, he reappears. These moments are not magic tricks. They are alignment signals. When both energies move toward awareness simultaneously, timelines begin to converge. It's as if the universe says, now. But here's something important. Synchronicities are confirmations, not guarantees. They signal readiness, not completion. The silence ending is the beginning of a new chapter, not the conclusion of the story. 6. A shift in his energy toward you. Even before consistent communication resumes, his energy toward you changes. If you interact, you may notice. He listens more. He responds with thoughtfulness. He mirrors your calmness instead of resisting it. He no longer tries to dominate or withdraw. The power struggle dissolves. Because awakening humbles the ego. He no longer approaches you from pride. He approaches from reflection. There's less tension, less push-pull, more grounded presence, and perhaps most importantly, less fear in his eyes. When someone is avoiding, their energy feels sharp, almost defensive. When someone is returning, their energy feels softer, more intentional. 7. The urge to clear the past. As silence ends, unfinished business surfaces. He may want to talk about what happened, not to argue, but to understand. Because unresolved tension becomes unbearable once awareness grows. He may say, I've been thinking about everything. I didn't realize how I was showing up. I understand you better now. These are not rehearsed lines. They are realizations. And realizations only come after internal processing. The divine masculine who once ran from conflict now seeks resolution. Because he understands that connection cannot move forward without clearing the debris of the past. This is a powerful sign. It means he is no longer running from discomfort. He is walking toward it. 8. Consistency replacing impulsiveness. When silence ends from awakening, not loneliness, behavior shifts. He becomes more consistent. Not perfect, but intentional. He checks in without disappearing for weeks. He follows through more often. He respects boundaries more clearly. Why? Because awakening teaches responsibility. And responsibility transforms connection. This is how you know the silence is truly ending. Not just temporarily breaking. Doesn't feel chaotic. Feels steady. 9. You feel calm instead of anxious. Perhaps the most important sign has nothing to do with him. It has to do with you. When the silence ends in alignment, you don't feel desperate. You don't feel frantic. You don't feel like you're getting him back. You feel calm, centered, grounded, because you are no longer trying to control the outcome. And that calmness allows the reconnection to feel safe. If communication resumes and you feel anxiety spike intensely, it may still be old patterns resurfacing. But if you feel peace, that's alignment. 10. The silence feels complete, not interrupted. There's a profound difference between silence being interrupted and silence being completed. When it's interrupted, it feels temporary. When it's completed, it feels like closure of a chapter. The energy changes permanently. You sense that something has shifted for good. The avoidance is gone. The resistance is thinner. The dynamic is evolving. And even if there are still conversations to have, wounds to address, growth to integrate, you know deep down, this isn't the same story repeating. It's a new phase beginning. Why this matters? The end of silence isn't about ego validation. It's not about proving you were right. It's not about winning the connection. It's about evolution. The divine masculine cannot avoid you anymore, because he cannot avoid himself anymore. And once self-awareness arrives, connection follows. But here's the most empowering truth. The silence didn't end because you waited perfectly. It ended because both energies shifted, because growth occurred, because lessons integrated, because awakening unfolded. The signs are subtle at first. Energetic shifts, digital proximity, gentle messages, softened tone, accountability, consistency. But together they form a pattern. Pattern that says, the wall is falling, the heart is opening, and the silence, it has served its purpose. Now it dissolves. When the silence finally breaks, it can feel surreal. After all the waiting, after all the questions, after all the nights you replayed conversations in your head, now here you are, standing at the edge of reconnection. But this is the part most people misunderstand. Not every reunion is transformation. Not every return is alignment. Sometimes people come back because they're lonely. Sometimes they come back because something else didn't work out. Sometimes they come back because they miss the comfort, not the growth. So how do you know this reunion is different? You feel it, not as butterflies, not as anxiety, but as grounded clarity. Because this time it isn't about chasing. It isn't about proving. It isn't about filling a void. It's about alignment. And alignment changes everything. The energy is no longer desperate. In the past, the connection may have felt intense, magnetic, even overwhelming. You may have felt pulled toward him in ways you couldn't explain. The chemistry was undeniable. The emotional depth was immediate. The bond felt destined. But it also may have felt unstable. Hot and cold. Close and distant. Connected and confused. The push-pull dynamic thrived on imbalance. Now, there's still depth. There's still magnetism. But the desperation is gone. You're not afraid of losing him every time he takes longer to respond. You're not analyzing every word. You're not trying to control the outcome. Why? Because you found your center during the silence. You rebuilt yourself. And he feels that shift. When reunion happens after growth, it feels calmer, more deliberate, less chaotic. It's no longer two wounded parts colliding. It's two evolving individuals choosing to meet again. That choice makes it different. It's not about winning anymore. At some point in separation, ego can quietly creep in. I'll show him what he lost. He'll realize I was the best thing that happened to him. When he comes back, I won't make it easy. And that's understandable. Silence hurts. Avoidance hurts. Being misunderstood hurts. But if reunion is rooted in revenge or validation, it recreates the old cycle. This time feels different because you're not trying to win. You're not trying to prove your worth. You already know your worth. And because you know it, you don't need him to confirm it. That shift alone transforms the dynamic. Now, if he returns, it's not about him recognizing your value. It's about whether he can match it. That's alignment. Accountability is present. One of the clearest markers of a different reunion is accountability. In the past, conversations may have gone in circles. Blame, deflection, miscommunication, unresolved tension. But this time, there's ownership. He may say things like, "I wasn't emotionally available before. I handled things poorly. I needed to grow. I understand you better now." These words are not small. They reflect self-awareness. And self-awareness is the foundation of lasting connection. Without it, reunion is just repetition. With it, reunion becomes evolution. But accountability isn't one-sided. You may also see your own patterns more clearly now. Maybe you overgave. Maybe you ignored red flags. Maybe you tried to fix what wasn't yours to fix. Growth means you both see yourselves more honestly. And honesty changes the tone of everything. The conversation feels real. Before, conversations may have felt charged, emotional, reactive, sometimes explosive. Now they feel grounded. You can talk without defensiveness dominating the space. You can express needs without fear of abandonment. You can listen without immediately preparing your counterargument. There is space between reaction and response. That space is maturity. And maturity creates safety. When two people feel safe enough to speak openly, the connection deepens naturally. There's less performance, less pretending, less emotional armor. You're no longer trying to impress each other. You're trying to understand each other. That's different. The fear of loss is replaced with trust in self. In the old dynamic, fear may have driven many choices. Fear of losing him. Fear of being replaced. Fear of not being enough. Now, even if you care deeply, you don't feel consumed by fear. Because you trust yourself. You trust that if this connection is meant to grow, it will. And if it cannot meet you at your level, you will survive. That internal security is powerful. It removes pressure from the relationship. When you're not clinging, the connection breathes. When you're not trying to control timing, it unfolds naturally. And ironically, that detachment creates stability. The masculine energy feels steadier. In the earlier stages, he may have oscillated between closeness and withdrawal. Intense affection followed by silence. Deep connection followed by avoidance. But now, if the reunion is aligned, his energy feels steadier. Not perfect, but consistent. He initiates more. He follows through more. He communicates more clearly. He doesn't disappear at the first sign of emotional depth. Why? Because awakening replaced fear with understanding. He knows what running costs now. He felt the emptiness of avoidance. He experienced the consequences of pride. And he doesn't want to repeat that cycle. That awareness stabilizes his behavior. You're both more selective. This reunion isn't fueled by fantasy. It's grounded in reality. You both understand that connection alone isn't enough. Compatibility matters. Timing matters. Emotional readiness matters. So instead of rushing back into intensity, you move more intentionally. You observe. You communicate. You set boundaries. And boundaries are not walls, they are standards. When two people respect each other's standards, trust builds. This isn't about recreating the spark. It's about sustaining the flame. The spiritual bond feels integrated, not obsessive. During separation, spiritual connections can feel overwhelming. Synchronicities, telepathic sensations, intense dreams, emotional waves can feel almost consuming. But when reunion happens after growth, the spiritual intensity feels integrated. It's still deep, still meaningful, but it's not destabilizing. You don't feel out of control. You feel aligned. The bond becomes something you experience, not something that controls you. That balance is maturity on a soul level. This time you're both choosing, not reacting. Perhaps the most important difference. This reunion is a choice. Before, you may have reacted to attraction, reacted to loneliness, reacted to fear. Now you're choosing consciously. You're asking, does this connection support who I've become? Can we build something stable? Are we aligned in values, not just chemistry? He may be asking similar questions. And that mutual evaluation is healthy. Because real partnership isn't about destiny alone. It's about decision. When two evolved individuals choose each other, not out of need but out of alignment, the foundation is stronger. Reunion is not the finish line. Here's the truth most don't say. Reunion is not the reward. Growth is. The silence forced you inward. It strengthened your boundaries, deepened your self-worth, clarified what you truly need. That transformation is permanent regardless of outcome. So when reunion comes, it's not about finally being complete. You were already complete. It's about exploring whether two whole individuals can now walk side by side. That mindset prevents regression. It ensures that reunion doesn't erase the lessons of separation. Why this reunion feels peaceful? If you step back and truly observe, the biggest difference is this. There is peace. Not constant adrenaline. Not constant anxiety. Peace. The conversations feel steady. The energy feels balanced. The silence no longer feels threatening. And even if challenges arise, they don't shake your foundation the way they once did. Because you've grown. He's grown. And growth transforms dynamics. The final shift. In the past, the connection may have felt like something happening to you. Now, it feels like something you're consciously participating in. You're not swept away. You're present. And he isn't hiding. He's showing up. Maybe slowly. Maybe imperfectly. But intentionally. That intention is everything. Because intention is the opposite of avoidance. And avoidance was the root of silence. This reunion is different because it's not about fixing the past. It's about building from a new version of yourselves. The old dynamic was built on wounds meeting wounds. The new dynamic has the potential to be built on awareness meeting awareness. And that shift changes the trajectory entirely. This isn't the same love story repeating. It's a rewritten chapter. One where both characters have evolved. One where silence served its purpose. One where avoidance transformed into understanding. And now what unfolds next isn't driven by fear. It's driven by choice. If you've made it this far through the confusion, the distance, the unanswered questions, then you already understand something profound. The silence changed you. First, it felt like punishment, like rejection, like abandonment. You questioned everything. Was it real? Did I imagine the depth? Why would something so intense just disappear? You replayed memories like scenes from a film, searching for the exact moment things shifted. You looked for mistakes. You wondered if you were too much, too emotional, too expressive, too honest. But here's the truth you can see now. The silence was never meant to break you. It was meant to build you. And that changes everything. The silence forced you inward. When someone you deeply connect with pulls away, your instinct is to reach outward. To fix it. To explain. To repair. But when that effort meets a wall of quiet, something happens. Eventually you stop knocking. Eventually you stop trying to force doors open. Eventually you sit with yourself. And in that stillness you begin to see clearly. You see where you overgave. You see where you ignored your own needs. You see where you tried to earn love that should have flowed naturally. The silence stripped away illusion. It revealed patterns. And awareness is the first step to transformation. You didn't just survive separation. You evolved through it. You became the stability you were seeking. Before, you may have unconsciously looked to him for reassurance, for validation, for confirmation that the connection was real. Now, you don't need constant proof, because you became your own anchor. You learned how to self-soothe instead of spiraling. You learned how to redirect your focus back to your goals. You learned how to sit with longing without letting it consume you. That inner stability is powerful, and it shifts the dynamic completely. Because when you no longer need someone to regulate your emotions, you relate from strength, not fear. And strength attracts differently than desperation ever could. The divine masculine couldn't avoid you forever. Here's the deeper spiritual truth behind this journey. He wasn't avoiding you. He was avoiding himself. You mirrored parts of him he wasn't ready to confront. His vulnerability, his emotional depth, his fear of intimacy, his wounds around trust and worthiness. Being with you meant seeing those parts clearly. Running from you meant postponing that reflection. But postponement is not escape. Eventually, life presents lessons again, often in stronger forms. And when he finally realized that the discomfort he was trying to avoid was actually the doorway to growth, something shifted. Not because you waited perfectly, not because you suffered enough, but because evolution is inevitable when the soul is involved. And the soul does not allow stagnation forever. The silence was preparation, not rejection. What if the distance wasn't about losing each other? What if it was about becoming the versions of yourselves capable of loving each other properly? Before separation, the connection may have been intense but unstable, deep but reactive, magnetic but ungrounded. Now, after growth, it has the potential to be conscious, intentional, stable. The silence gave you both time to heal attachment wounds, build self-worth, clarify boundaries, mature emotionally. Without that space, the relationship might have burned out. With that space, it can rebuild differently. That doesn't mean reunion is guaranteed, but it does mean the connection has transformed. And transformation is never wasted. Even if he returns, you are no longer waiting. This is the most empowering shift of all. You are no longer in pause mode. You are not putting your life on hold. You are not measuring your worth by whether he reaches out. You are living, growing, expanding. If he returns, he meets you where you are now, not where you were before. And if he doesn't, you still move forward, because your growth was never conditional. The silence taught you how to choose yourself. And once you learn that lesson, you never fully unlearn it. Love is no longer an obsession, it's a choice. Before, the connection may have felt fated, inevitable, almost overwhelming. Now it feels intentional, grounded. You understand that real partnership isn't just about chemistry. It's about emotional availability, consistency, shared values, mutual effort. You're no longer romanticizing potential. You're evaluating reality. And that discernment protects you. It ensures that if you open your heart again, it's from awareness, not illusion. The silence strengthened your intuition. One unexpected gift of separation? Clarity. When external noise fades, intuition grows louder. You learn to trust your inner knowing. You learn to differentiate between anxiety and intuition. You learn to recognize when energy feels aligned and when it doesn't. That inner compass is priceless, because moving forward, whether with him or someone else, you won't ignore red flags. You won't silence your needs. You won't abandon yourself to keep someone close. That lesson alone makes the silence worth it. You don't fear losing him anymore. At some point, something clicked inside you. You realize, if it's meant to align, it will. If it isn't, forcing it won't make it sacred. And that realization dissolved fear. Because fear thrives on attachment to outcomes. When you release rigid expectations, you gain peace. You understand that love is not about possession. It's about resonance. And resonance cannot be forced. It either harmonizes, or it fades. Either way, you remain whole. The silence ends, but your power remains. As communication resumes or clarity emerges, you may feel excitement, hope, curiosity. That's natural. But notice something. You're not losing yourself in it. You're not abandoning your routines. You're not dropping your boundaries. You're observing, feeling, choosing. That's growth in action. And growth ensures that whatever happens next, whether it's reunion or redirection, you remain grounded. Because the true transformation wasn't about him awakening. It was about you remembering your power. This journey was never about chasing. It was about awakening. For both of you, the divine masculine had to confront avoidance. You had to confront overextension. He had to face vulnerability. You had to face attachment. Both lessons mattered. Both lessons shaped you. And now you stand in a different energy entirely. Not desperate. Not waiting. Not doubting. But aware. Aligned. Empowered. What if silence is an emptiness? What if it's incubation? Seeds grow in darkness before they break through soil. Transformation happens unseen before it becomes visible. The quiet you endured was not meaningless. It was sacred space for evolution. You were becoming stronger. He was becoming aware. The connection was shedding immaturity. And now, whatever unfolds next unfolds from a higher level of consciousness. That's the gift. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. How did the silence change you? What strengths did you discover within yourself? What boundaries did you learn to set? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story may help someone else who is still in the middle of their silence. If you're walking this twin flame journey, subscribe to this channel for deeper insights into divine timing, masculine awakening, and conscious reunion. And most importantly, remember this: the silence was never proof that you were unworthy. It was proof that something powerful was shifting beneath the surface. Stay grounded, stay evolving, stay aligned with your highest self. Because when you do, love doesn't have to be chased. It meets you where you stand.